for joining us. I'm Paul Wilson.
And I'm Chris Emke.
And this is Diesel Performance Podcast. Chris, we are going to be going through some different trucks, some different RPOs, some different generations of diesel trucks over the next few weeks, talking about the good, the bad, and the ugly of the truck. So, Chris, this is one of the few times that we haven't really planned out a ton of the episode. I think we're going to do a little bit more just kind of conversational style based off of our experience with these. I thought the easiest place to start would be with the LB7 Duramax. And when I say easiest, I mean easiest for me.
Oh, because it's the first generation of the Duramax.
Yes, it's the first truck that I learned about. It's the one that I loosely have a good handle over.
Teach me a little bit about the 01 to 04 first generation Duramax.
All right, well, let's go through the good first.
Okay.
This was a revolutionary truck to the diesel space. This is common rail, mass-produced in a pickup truck. Had not been done.
I wish we were on camera because your hands are selling me right now.
I get passionate about this. I mean, the idea that we went from mechanical injection to electronically controlled common rail injection, it can't be understated how revolutionary this was.
It was.
So with that came some really, really cool stuff, like a very functional, very efficient turbocharger on a diesel truck. Also something that I would argue they probably weren't the most well-known for. Yeah, they were turbocharged well before this. That's nothing new to diesel.
Right.
But the size of the turbo, the efficiency of the turbo, the longevity of the stock turbo, all those things I think rivaled pretty much anything that had been out there before, as well as like peak boost numbers from the factory and things of that nature.
Right. I always find, the earlier generations of the trucks, and you say it's revolutionary and electronically controlled. I guess I wasn't around then, right, for that engineering and what took place, but I always find it confusing that they had a engine control management system, the ECM, can talk to another system, which is your fuel injection control module, that then controlled the fuel system or the injectors turning on and off. So it's so many steps, which in the later years that goes away. So when I think LB7, that's literally what I think of.
Is FICM issues?
It's FICM. If not, I'm not saying FICM issues.
Okay.
But it's just it's a complexity, right? It's just it's one more thing in the system. So, as we talk about LB7 Duramax and the simplicity of that platform, because it is the most simplistic platform in all the RPOs, right, of the Duramax lineup, there's still some of those little quirks. And that's one of the things I think of is the FICM and the fixed vane turbo.
Yeah. Absolutely. Now, one of the other big things that Duramax brought to the table was mating it up with an Allison transmission.
Yep.
So automatics, again, nothing new to the diesel pickup space. They've always been around. However, I don't think anything really rivaled the drivability, the smoothness of an Allison transmission at that point. In 01, what else was out there that you were like, oh no, that's a reliable automatic transmission?
No, I mean, a lot of the earlier, adopters in the diesel space, I want the Allison trans. These are guys that came from Cummins powered vehicles that had really poor transmission reliability, but it was the Cummins engine that a lot of guys gravitated towards. Even in the earlier Duramax or earlier GM diesel stuff, the 6.5 stuff was a Detroit thing, a collab there.
Yeah.
So, there were some loyalists there, but the engines were severely underpowered. Right. So, when Allison Duramax combo came out in 01, that was the hot truck on the street, not to mention, power ratio, that thing made serious power. It was a hot rod from the factory. You could tow. It was fun to drive compared to anything else in its class. We're talking 2001. We're talking 180, 200 horsepower Cummins inline motors, and we're talking, 200 horsepower, 7.3 Power Strokes. We're talking some really doggy platforms.
And late model 7.3s that were riddled with their own uniqueness.
Yeah. No, right.
Yeah.
We've done episodes that is an episode and a topic all in its own.
You're right.
And then the one thing too to point out, a lot of guys nowadays, they get so wrapped up in injector technology. That is the LB7s are the only RPO that run a VCO style nozzle. Everything post LB7 are all sack nozzle.
Talk a little bit about that. What's the difference between VCO and SAC?
So the difference between a VCO nozzle and a SAC nozzle is the design of the nozzle and how the fuel injects into the cylinder. Okay, the VCO, think of a cone. Okay, a straight up cone, and there is a plunger that literally stops fuel flow from ever passing it. And when it opens, the injector body is pressurized and fuel then squirts directly into the cylinder from that injector nozzle. Technology amazing, right? Yep. But in later years, they wanted to help try to clean up some of the atomization in smoke output, okay, the efficiency of the nozzle itself. And that's where the SAC nozzle came in. So the SAC nozzle, still shaped similar to a cone, but it literally has a sac at the bottom of the nozzle where fuel is always pressurized in that space. So when that pintle lifts and the injector is pressurized for fuel to inject, you have pretty much like a preload in a sense. So it's able to inject at a more efficient the rate, right? The energy of that injection itself has a more positive rate to offer a cleaner burn. Essentially, right. is the way it comes down to. So SAC nozzles are going to be a little less wear than what you would see in a VCO. We know, working here and dealing with guys like Exergy Performance, there's some cool technology advancements, over the last 20 years to make that VCO style nozzle more durable, like the diamond-like coating and things of that nature. But yeah, I figured point out, that is the only injector out of the lineup that was a VCO base.
Now, we don't really get people wanting VCOs. What we get is people calling in wanting to go to like the SAC 45.
Right.
And now have I seen they even have smaller than SAC 45 out there?
There is a company that they did a collab with Bosch and engineering a factory SAC style nozzle. So Bosch Motorsport, they offer from the factory a SAC nozzle for the LB7, but the smallest nozzle size is 45%.
Yeah.
So even with companies like Exergy, where they get into the heavily modified injector, you could do a SAC nozzle, but the smallest you could go is a 45 and goes up from there.
Yep, absolutely. These trucks did have some bad spots in them. And it's a first generation. It's a total revamp of the entire diesel truck line. You're going to expect to have some issues. Yeah. So 01 to 04 Duramax, they pretty much realized we got some injector issues. Yeah. LB7s have notoriously run out of reliability from your injectors. Around 100,000 miles, I'd say, is pretty common. Yeah. There's definitely a handful of guys that fall in underneath that level.
Oh, yeah. That mileage, there's a lot to be said, right? For years on any of the platforms, we have these, within 100,000 or within this many miles. Well, then as these vehicles get older, age plays a role. It's not good to have an injector sitting in a truck for 10 years and never start it, So there's checks and balances with all of that. But I would say for an actively used truck, that 100,000 mile on a stock injector you did well if you got 100,000 out of one. In the newer style, VCO stuff or the SAC style stuff, I think you can get an injector's lifespan to last a little bit longer and kind of keep up with some of the newer style injectors. I've always told guys 150, 200,000, on a healthy set of, good fuel running through the truck on any of the newer style injectors. But once you get up into that 150, 200 range, it's going to be something you're going to have to investigate, potentially swapping out and updating.
You've gotten your money's worth at that point.
You say that it's a double-edged sword because common rail injectors and any of the platforms are very, very expensive.
Yeah.
There'll be guys that are true LB7 loyalists and fans, and they're like, well, injectors for those trucks are cheaper. Right, but it's double the labor to do the job versus paying a little bit more money for the injectors in the newer style. The technology is advanced, right? There's different makeup of the bodies and of the internal workings of the injectors, but the labor is half the time. So, it's a trade-off altogether.
It's funny you bring that up because we spend so much time around mechanics here at Duramax Tuner who I feel like have it ingrained in them to hate the engineers from manufacturers because engineers generally don't make a mechanic's job easier.
No.
Every generation of the truck seems like it just gets harder and harder for any real human to work on them.
There's more complexity. There's more things going on with that platform.
But LB7 to LLY, that jump there, I feel like that's one time they actually heard them. I feel like that's one time, and I don't know if it's because GM had to eat the cost of so many of those injector replacements where they were like, hey, listen, for our warranty department's sake, put the injectors outside of the fucking head.
I
We're
mean,
done.
and that's crazy too, because I mean, you think of a 5.9 Cummins, right, in those year models, and the injectors were always under the valve cover. Like, it seemed pretty standard, like not out of the ordinary, right? So to see that change from the LV7 into the LOY, which is the next RPO, to have those injectors outside of the valve cover, it was kind of another revolutionary type, change, because now you could service the truck a lot easier, along with a lot of other really cool technology. So, the LOIs, a lot of guys kind of put those as kind of like the black sheep of the group. Like, it really is a cool platform, all in all, for what it truly symbolizes.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the LLY almost feels like a response to the problems they had with the LB7, which isn't something we're used to seeing from manufacturers of like actually looking at our platform and saying, oh, here's a shift that, hey, we had to add an EGR. That's why there's an 04.5 split.
Right.
But as long as we're doing that, here's all of these other updates that we could throw in there along with
it.
Which is really cool. But with the LB7, I would say there's a few other things that commonly get overlooked. Intake air horns. Do you remember like when we used to have almost every LB7 customer in here who had honed out his own air horn?
Well, it's saving money.
Yeah.
I did that.
Cut out the air box, hone out the intake horn.
The shop manager now, when DJ had his first LB7, when I had mine, literally we'd buy the trucks, they were used, higher mileage trucks. The first thing we did at the shop, pull the horn off to get a Dremel, spend an hour and a half, modding that, opening that up, taking the factory air box, opening that up. We never wanted to buy boost increase valves. We literally blocked the wastegate off altogether. We'd get a hot tune in there, back then, Nick was, in his garage, or that was right when the transition to Union took place. So, we'd have Nick throw a tune in the truck, and, we were local town heroes, driving around in, those fully built stock trucks going in lit mode.
Like, if they would have had the sticker out back then, you would have had the locally hated.
Yeah, I would say.
We all have embarrassing stuff about our past.
I'm not
embarrassed.
No shame. So we're good.
Shame.
The reason I got into diesel trucks was I could blow black smoke. Like, that was the thing, right? And my first diesel that I started to modify was an old first-gen Dodge. Dude, bought the truck, drove it home from Green Bay, Wisconsin, drove it home, went on YouTube, learned how to tune the fuel screw and modify the pump, maxed the shit out of it. And, like, I would just go driving around, dude. Like,
if you got a call from that kid today, you'd lose it. That'd be like your worst call of the day.
I do lose it, yeah. I mean, here's the thing, right? This isn't a, let's talk about me thing, but the idea and what was accepted back in 2009, 2010, diesel was still very early. Like, one of the kids that I went to school, grew up with, his name was Brian, and I went to a high school where we got our CDLs junior, senior year. We ran backhoes, front end loaders, drove semis. Like, Wildtech donated a couple of diesel engines to us for us to tear down and put back together. Like, not a lot of high schools have that type of stuff. No,
you got to have quite a bit of farm field around your school to get that.
No, exactly that. And my buddy Brian, he had a cousin, he had a nasty 6-liter. Like, it was an 0460.
It was the coolest thing ever then.
It was a 4-door long bed, had, stacks out the back, and the thing sounded gnarly. It moved out. Like, it rode out for back then. Like, no one had anything like that.
Right.
Like, and it was always, this guy 3 towns over, he's got a truck with a box programmer, and like, it's tuned with a bully dog. Like, that's badass, And that's kind of that era. Now in today's world, like, you still get those guys like, can I get a smoke tune? Can I get a lobe tune? How do I make my truck smoke? Right.
Yeah.
The consensus of what the diesel industry is now is, I want the truck to be clean and run well. A lot of guys broke a lot of shit over the years.
It's so funny you say that. Before walking in here, I just got off the phone with a friend of mine that has a shop in Arkansas, and he was saying that just over the last 3 to 5 years, his business has completely shifted. Now, keep in mind, he does no marketing. but his calls have completely gone from, I want to delete it, I want to blow black smoke, I want 600 horsepower. He says he gets maybe one of those a day now. What he gets nine or 10 calls a day about is, I just needed to run to work and I needed to be reliable. And that's it. That's all his clientele wants at this point. We're starting to see that more and more out in the market space.
The industry is maturing. Think of how many people own diesel trucks 10, 15 years ago to how many people own diesel trucks in today's world. That has grown exponentially. And as, we're sitting here talking about, the RPOs, we're getting a little off track, but, there are still guys out there that buy LB7 Duramaxes that are virgin trucks and never been modified. This is their first diesel, so it really goes to show that where we work, we take a lot of that for granted. We had Nick on the podcast last week talking about how his start and all this was. Sometimes you kind of have to take a step back and think, okay, what was it like 8-9 years ago working here? How many people were we talking to that owned trucks? How many trucks were out in the market space? Every year as new trucks come out, there's that many more guys that are getting into that space, and their trucks that they had are now secondhand going to a new diesel enthusiast that's now doing research. So, it's a crazy evolving, full circle experience of guys that, are just starting to get into this.
Absolutely. And the LB7s we're finding are kind of having their own little heyday, their resurgence here, if you will.
Oh my God!
About guys who maybe went all the way up to LBZ, LMM, LMLs, and now they're saying, you know what, $90,000 for an L5P plus emissions equipment? No, thank you. I'm going to go hard pass there, and I'm going to go back and find a barn find a grandpa truck. I'm going to dig up an LB7, and I'm going to do what I always wanted to do but couldn't afford when I owned it.
No, I mean, there's a lot of those, especially, I try to block out COVID 20 and 21. I just try to block all together. But we saw a huge influx of guys that they had the truck. They've had it since high school, had it since college. They want to give that truck a second life. Or, hey, I went to go sell off my truck to go buy a new one, sold my truck, realized that I couldn't buy a new one because there was none to buy.
Yeah.
I ended up, searching the country, finding that older truck and repurposing it. And, there are some guys out there that they'll throw some serious money into those trucks, and you take a $10,000, $20,000 truck that's a clean body and you throw $30,000 into it for a complete new drivetrain. That's a ton of money, but it's really, when you compare it to what a new truck is, it's a cheaper alternative.
Yeah, I mean, if you're liquid and you got the cash to throw it at that, I don't think you're crazy. No. I think there's a valid group of guys out there, group of people out there who that's a totally viable option. It's going to work out really, really well. I would say, noting most of the LB7s that we see come through the shop, there's a few things you should probably look out for.
Yeah.
What's the last time you saw an LB7 with no rust? No rust and no repaired rust?
I mean, you got to understand where we're located, right?
Yeah.
I'm sure if we were talking to someone or interviewing someone from, out west, they would have a different opinion on that. And I have guys that they bring trucks from out west here, those trucks aren't going to live very long here, all things considered. But, I think, if you're local to the Midwest, or the Rust Belt, so to speak, it's going to be tough. You're going to have body issues, but, you find a lot of guys that either it's a clean body, they have to do mechanical stuff, or mechanically it's somewhat there, maybe a few little minor things, but it needs body work. I mean, it's one or the other.
Yeah. Is it just me, or rust doesn't ruin an LB7 for you? I've seen plenty of rusted out LB7s that I'm still like, damn, she looks good.
Yeah, no, I definitely, you could have the rust in the right spots. How about that? You got to think. I mean, we're talking 20-year-old trucks, 22-year-old trucks now,
What do you prefer? What do you think's cooler, the cat eye or the bubble nose?
I'm a bubble nose guy.
Really?
Yeah, all day long. I'd prefer the cat eye interior, just the updated seats and stuff like that. I'm a big fan of. But if I had to choose, a 102 truck all day long.
Oh,
yeah.
That's funny because I think that's maybe the most hideous Duramax ever made,
No.
including all of the hate for the 15s and 19s and all that stuff when they came out.
You got to be attention to detail. The 0102 HDs have a bubbled nose, so it's kind of like a built-in cowled hood in a sense. It's really mean from the front. So, it's just I've always been that way.
That's so funny. Yeah, no, I think we're gonna have to agree to disagree on that one. I think they're quite hideous.
I think we're gonna agree to disagree. Moving up on the RPOs and talking about the LOIs, right? Because I think that platform is the complete underdog. I think that anyone that has an opportunity to buy one, if they're even looking in some of the newer trucks, should definitely rethink and look at an LOI. I personally really like that platform.
Okay, so what crazy things have I said about LOIs in the last 7 years on this show? A lot. Yeah, I've had a lot of hate to spew.
Honestly, I think for you it's like 6-liter LOI. Like it's that type of hatred.
It is.
Yeah.
And I think a lot of that came from when I was on the phones and dealing with customers with LOIs that were problematic. Mm-hmm. And if you didn't have a customer who is ready to spend 10 or 15 grand to fix all of the factory fuck ups, that truck was a pile. Yeah.
What were those factory fuck-ups? Like, let's talk about from your perspective.
Classic 2.7 injector harness issue. Okay. Most of those are fixed. I'll give you that. Yeah. That's pretty well updated at this point. A surprising number of high EGT trucks is what I strongly remember out of LOIs that were they felt undiagnosable at the time. Yeah. Now, we didn't have the same tools and technology that we do today, yada, yada, yada. We didn't have awesome stealth boost testers. We didn't have really all that great of data logging capabilities. Mm-hmm. EGT probes, aftermarket installed on the manifold, only last so long. They're only so accurate. So I had a lot of heating issues with the LOI in general. Yeah. Why? What do you think LOIs are known? What do you think their biggest failure points are?
Well, I mean, I think, if you get into the nitty-gritty, the intake horn is severely restricted for airflow getting into the turbo. Yep. And ironically, that is the biggest production turbo out of all the RPOs. Yeah. So the biggest turbo from the factory. Aside from having the biggest compressor wheel, they also have the loosest exhaust housing. So they are one of the more laggy trucks for drivability. And I blame some of the EGT issues to that issue right there. The turbocharger itself and just being
and the intake horn. Yeah, the two put together for sure.
Those are two things that I think are probably some of the stragglers in the system. EGRs were introduced federally, so you could get California LB7s with EGRs, which whatever. But from a federal perspective, LOIs, EGRs, and a lot of guys ruled out that the EGR caused head gasket issues, right? I am not agreeing to disagree or disagreeing in any way, shape, or form on that topic.
You're going Switzerland on this one?
I'm going Switzerland. I'm going neutral because we've seen trucks in here, original head gaskets, 200,000-300,000 miles, EGRs on there. They never had a tune, and it's been well maintained, and there's never been an issue.
And Grandpa never hit more than 20% throttle.
Well, I'm just saying.
That's not this is my pushback on that because you're not wrong. No. That factually, we've seen those trucks together. You're not wrong. That can happen. Man, God, you just made me flash back to just how many LOI head gasket jobs I've quoted and dealt with. And
But here, we could fast forward to later years and we could talk about, when you were heavily in sales and being on the phones, talking to customers with newer LMLs, like, oh, those things are great. They never pop a head gasket. A majority of the head gasket jobs that I quote and get in the shop these days are LML based.
Sure.
So, are you going to blame those on EGRs? No, I think tuning and neglect and abuse, all of this stuff plays a key role. And nowadays, right, in the world of end of 2022, like we are going to see those LB7s and those LOIs that have never had a head gasket issue now have a head gasket issue because of age.
Yeah, 10 years.
Electrolysis and the coolant, stuff like that, never being flushed out. You see crazy stuff like that. But, from my end, I just think the LOI, the VGT, the EGR, those were introduced, right? You have injectors outside of the valve cover, sac nozzle injectors. I think, one of the biggest issues out of that truck personally that didn't take place until the following RPO was those trucks still had FICMs. Yeah. Which just it's the little things to add complexity in another area for something to fail.
Yeah, it's also, I wonder what the computer technology played into that.
Oh, for sure.
Of like, could you not just build a bigger ECM with all of that circuitry in one board? Like
Oh.
that. That's one of those that I guess I always have the question for the engineer on is like, what was the benefit of the FICM at the time? Because it's a computer.
But we know the technology wasn't there when you think of the circuitry and the circuit board of the LB7 and the LOI ECM and some of the finicky characteristics when you go to flash them and do those things, that once you got into the 06 and they were able to compact everything into that ECM, no more FICM, like you don't really run into LBZ plus ECM issues. Like you look at the occasional problem, which it's electronic, it's operating, there's always issues, or there could always be, but like never to the rate that you would see in an 01 to 05 truck.
No, that's a good point. Is how often do we see LB7 LOI ECMs just crash? Just straight up, just mid flash, no reason, didn't get interrupted, just crash, or you hook up to them and the truck runs and drives fine. You go to communicate and it's never been tuned, it's never been touched, allegedly, and you just can't flash it. Just will not communicate, will not connect. That can be very frustrating.
Absolutely. Then you kind of get into, I think, the LBZ platform, right? You think like 06, 07 stuff.
Slightly overhyped, but one of my favorites.
One of your favorites. What were the changes that you noticed going from the LOI to the LBZ?
Yeah, so I'll hit the things everybody knows, right? So we went from a 5-speed Allison to a 6-speed Allison.
Super badass, right?
Completely changed the game. Also completely changed the reliability. I assume torque converter change in there as well. Still had a VVT turbo. I know from being here, hey, they're slightly different. I don't know how much like guys at home would like really notice the difference.
A lot of guys say that. I just got a phone with a guy today. He's like, I got an LBZ. My dad's got an LOI. My dad's truck runs out. It's built trans max effort. He goes, my truck is stock trans. It has a tune, but my truck runs out and his truck makes more power. My truck responds better. That's that provision in the turbocharger to help it respond and be a little bit more, quicker to spool with, the exhaust side and the way that the turbocharger essentially would use the exhaust gases.
Right. Right.
So, I always think about the LBZ as kind of being like that next level, like there's no comparison when you go from an LOI to an LBZ.
Still had an EGR, but a lot less head gasket issues for whatever engineering. Maybe we can get an engine guy on here to tell us why one of them has it and one of them doesn't, or at least a reputation, why an LOI has a reputation and LBZ doesn't. I think the big thing on LBZs that we saw probably like 3 to 5 years ago was more of the fact that guys were really fed up with emissions equipment, and this is prior to DPF and DEF, which are the most notorious to fail. And it's pretty easy. I mean, if you throw a blocker plate into an LBZ, it'll still run and drive. Even if it throws a check engine light, it's not going to limit your speed the way like a DPF will on a newer truck.
And I feel like that's the reason that truck is kind of in the Duramax realm. That's like the holy grail, right?
Yeah.
It's the last of the cat eye, right? It's that last old body style truck. It's the first with the 6-speed. It's a VGT turbo, and aside from the EGR, it is a pre-emissions truck. And there's guys that will pay stupid money.
Yeah.
For those reasons, and those reasons only, I would say if I were to look for an older Duramax, that older body style, I would buy the LOI because it's that old body style. You get the VGT technology. You get the injectors outside the valve cover. Okay. And I could modernize the truck. I could put a slightly tighter turbo from an LBZ on there. I can put a conversion kit, a 6-speed conversion into the truck.
Yeah.
And I know I will be light years ahead money-wise compared to what it would be to buy an LBZ.
You could also just throw an LBZ intake on it or an intake horn.
Intake horn and intake. But, I mean, you're talking a couple $1,000s. I talked to a gentleman the other day, super excited on his new purchase. He had an LBZ Duramax, and he was proud to let you know that throughout the entire conversation. Very, very smart, very educated. He has done a bunch of research.
Sure.
Right? Contractor by trade, and just he wanted the information shot to him straight. He wanted to debunk some of the things that he read and heard and seen and all that. So I asked him, I was like, all the year trucks, like the LBZ was it. He goes, oh, yeah. He goes, you had no idea what I picked up. And I'm like, oh, okay, So he knew this old gentleman in his town, stopped there, reached out to the guy, said, hey, if you ever consider selling the truck, I've been seeing it. It's cherry. I want to buy it. Old gentleman goes, well, he's like, I don't tow the camper anymore. He's like, I'm too old to be traveling. He goes, I'm actually going to be putting it up for sale. He goes, so I got the truck, 24,000 original miles, barn kept, right? He's like, I stole it, 29 grand. Oh. Which that's really fair. Like that's
market
not
price.
terrible.
Market price, that is fair. I think that may also have been the sticker price when the guy bought it.
Sticker price was closer to 40. I'm pretty sure for that. But
okay, 06, yeah.
So I'm like, we're sitting there talking, and this was the joke, right? Every clean old body Duramax we get in here is always like that birch, that silver birch, that pewterish gold, like, right? So I'm like, oh, what's the cab configuration? You know, cab and a half, long bed. He's pumped. I was like, what color? He goes, oh, well, you know, I'm not bragging about that. He's like, it's like this off gold. I'm like, silver birch. You got silver birch. Like, it makes total sense why you got that, right? Like, I think there was something in the paint with the silver birch that, like, those trucks just didn't rust, you know. But, you know, guys are, you know, what we're talking about, guys are willing to pay big money, but that's like the most modern, old style truck that you could potentially get your hands on.
That is,
you know?
yeah. Yeah, guys, listen, we're going to dive into all of the emissions-equipped Duramaxes here next week, so we'll be talking to you about that. Want to give a shout-out to our sponsors for today. We couldn't do this without them. No. We just got a chance to go out to the WC Fab open house here a couple weeks ago.
Pretty impressive.
Huge. I mean, when we say 100,000 square foot facility, that doesn't carry the feeling of how big it was,
or the amount of supporters that Jason has in the crew. God. Like, people flew in, drove in from all over. There were a ton of trucks. There were a ton of vendors supporting him in the open house. Like, it's really cool to see the growth and what's to come with the guys over at WC Fab.
No lie there. Exergy Performance, you know, we have their back. They have our back. We love their fuel systems and all of the components that they could offer us.
Winter's coming up. We got to get our winter additive re-up.
That's right. Yeah, we're ready, huh? What are you going to run are you going to drive the Cummins this winter? No,
it's going to get put in storage soon. I got the TDI, though.
You know,
so
I
got that.
Yeah.
No, I never was. Self-proclaimed cool.
And then, of course, XDP, your one-stop shop for diesel performance. They have everything. If you need it, XDP has it. Check them out.
And then Calibrated Power. Like, thanks for allowing us to do this, right? Like, if it wasn't for them.
Yeah, so we're in the Calibrated Power Duramax Tuner building and employee count right now. So, yes,
you know,
thank
you.
you.
Like that. Thank you. Thank you for allowing us to do our job. You know?
Guys, for today, this has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
Thanks for listening. Thanks for joining us today, guys. This has been Paul Wilson.
And Chris Emke.
Make sure to like and subscribe, and we'll talk to you again soon.
Whoa.
You're
You
such
sure?
a pile. You're such a pile.